All right, welcome back, everyone, to episode 119 of the RUDIS Wrestling Podcast, here with my co-host, Jason Bryant. JB, how's everything in Minnesota?
Well, today the current temperature is 26 as we record this on our normal Monday morning for the first episode of the week, and I can't really complain. I'm walking out after the Gopher Duel last night. I'm with Shane Sparks, Richard and Amanda Immel. We're walking to get a drink after the match, and we're just talking like, man, it's really nice out here. That it dawned on me, this is what 7 years in Minnesota does when it's 20 degrees, overcast, but not snowing, and that is deemed nice at 10 o'clock at night. So, what I was talking about last week with Minneapolis being a great host, I'm going to contradict myself quite frequently when we talk about how things are going here. But all in all, a nice little Monday. Got the coaches poll out for the NWCA, so waiting for those ballots to come back in. And with the results we had this weekend, it's going to be like okay, how do we rank these teams? Which is the every week we have this question.
Yeah, and typically, I mean, we're at the point in the year where typically you think the rankings are somewhat stabilized, but then you have a weekend like Sammy Sasso at 149. What do you do with that? And I know we're probably going to get into that here as the show progresses, but
wasn't aware that Sasso had a good weekend. Did he? Did he have a good weekend? Yeah. Pretty sure. Yeah. That was good.
So what does that do with him? For a guy like that, especially when, I think we should probably just jump into the heart of the dual meet, jump back, rewind to Friday night.
Which, by the way, Matt, was an amazing Friday night for wrestling because you had the ACC network launching wrestling with Virginia Tech and North Carolina. We're going to talk about that in a bit. And a doubleheader, Iowa, Ohio State, Penn State, Nebraska. I mean, it was kind of nerve-wracking to a point because I'm trying to watch my kids and not exactly pass off all the child care to my wife, but I'm sitting there and I'm on my couch downstairs, my brand new basement, and I've got the TV, I've got Big Ten Network on. I'm like, this is just an amazing Friday. So, what a great Friday viewer experience for wrestling. So, and we had great duels to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine the embarrassment of content that we're having in this day and age? Like, we couldn't even have thought about this 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And now all of a sudden it's like, you got to have, your laptop, your PC, your TV all booted up to, with different streams flowing, just because there's so much, not just the quantity, but the high quantity, high level of quality in wrestling action on Friday night.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that doesn't even go into details about, the schools that have their own streams and things like that. We're just talking about what's on TV with Big Ten Network, with Flow, with Track's got going on streaming too. I mean, there is just so many different things. Of course, the schools, like I had to log into my own school account to watch said alma mater wrestle a little bit this weekend. Or, typically when they were home, they were traveling this weekend. But the point is you're right, the embarrassment of content, because I'm sitting there thinking last night, I'm doing a little live text blog, and I'm sitting going, this was like 15 years ago. All we had was like the live text updates. There was Twitter would have been a game changer in 2005. We had to wait a couple more years, and then now the implementation of it. So just the access to results. No more waiting by your mailbox for amateur wrestling news, or waiting for somebody like me to update the results on Intermat. It's instantaneous, and we get to see it now. It's not just tape delay on CSTV at 4:00 in the afternoon on Thursday. So it is a really great time to be a college wrestling fan. With, again, we're seeing networks invest in wrestling. We're seeing a lot of, Jim and Sparks were on location in 2 sites this weekend. For a time there, they were just putting them in the studio in Chicago. I think when they're on location, they get a better feel of what the matches are like, and they get to kind of bring that through your television a little bit. So, if you're in Carver Hawkeye, you can kind of feel it come through your screen. You're going to only get that experience if you're there versus, them doing it remotely.
Yeah, so with me being on the East Coast, if the worst problem I can have on a Friday night is that I have to wait until 9 o'clock to watch the Ohio State Iowa match, things are pretty good. I'll take that.
Or how about this fact? Like, where were the complaints about the first match running over? Because it was wrestling. It wasn't basketball running over wrestling. Funny, those complaints of basketball running long are everywhere. Wrestling runs long. No, not a peep. Not a peep.
We'll take it, right?
That's because we like it.
Let's jump into Friday evening, Carver Hawkeye Arena, the big one. I think the one that I think, from the outside looking in, it kind of held true to form. I think we kind of, from a result standpoint, Iowa wins the duel 24-10, but I think there's a lot more takeaways than just the box score, because that's kind of what it's what we kind of thought the outcome of the match would look like. I don't know what your general takeaways for me, but once before we dig into the heart of the match, but kind of held true to form for the most part. I think there's outside of 149 and a couple matches, like it kind of went to script. Would you say?
Yeah, I didn't see anything that was too shocking there. I mean, I guess we wanted to see a couple matchups that didn't happen, and Tom Brands addressed that in his press conference with Max Muir not wrestling and Jacob Warner not wrestling. But again, we saw a stingy Sammy Sasso really kind of develop the ire of the Hawkeye fans after, everybody said, he won a match and didn't take a single offensive shot. And I'll explain that after his Brayton Lee. He had a response to that actually after the Gopher duel. But yeah, looking at it on paper, I mean, I think people were expecting to see this as a litmus test for Rocky Jordan because, beating Tyler Dow is not exactly the measuring stick you want to be placing. Now, you're looking at Abe Assad, who's sitting there ranked in the top 10. That's your measuring stick. Or Owen Webster, the match that he had on Sunday night. Those are measuring sticks to see where Rocky Jordan is at 184. So that was something I was really curious about. And Michael Kemmerer is just to me, so much fun to watch just because knowing that he's scoring, he looks like he's having a lot more fun out there, and I don't know if are we allowed to say the fun word when it comes to Iowa? I thought that was just I thought Penn State had that trademark, but
I think everybody's trying to make that coin their own phrase.
I was telling Sparks last night. I don't think there's been an Iowa team since I've really been following wrestling, probably since the 2002 was my first year going to the NCAAs in Albany, but I don't remember a team this entertaining to watch from a non-Iowan. Remember, I didn't grow up in that culture. So, people are used to seeing the grind it. And, the Brands mentality, the Brent Metcalf type of, punish him. Iowa is a fun team to watch this year. And it is really refreshing. And I think that's part of the fun of this season is like, this isn't the grind them into the mat Iowa. They've got those factors and they've got those wrestlers on those teams. But again, from an outside perspective, this is just a fun team to watch. And this duel was a fun duel to watch. So I really enjoyed every 5.5 hours that I watched of wrestling on Friday night, and Iowa was a big part of it.
Yeah, not only that, I think one thing that we could say in addition to Iowa's entertaining style, they're actually letting their personalities come through. And this is something that Ben and I have talked about previously, and Tommy and I have talked about, is like what Spencer Lee has done to the Iowa program, because it's not just his style of wrestling, but also his personality. And it just seems like, for the longest time, we labeled Iowa's wrestling in a certain way, and we probably labeled their personalities in a certain way as well. But I think not only is their wrestling somewhat different to the common viewer, if they've watched wrestling historically for the past 20, 30 years, but they've also taken on a certain persona from a personality standpoint. But now we're seeing, a guy like Spencer Lee, smiling, having fun, Marinelli is just a great, genuine personality that, a giving. So, yeah, I think we're seeing not only a different style, but a different personality from this team. For me, when I was looking at this duel, I kind of, like we said, kind of knew that Iowa was going to handle business. But for me, it was, I think some of the discussions that we've had in the ranking landscape is like, how justified are Iowa's rankings? And I think this is an opportunity for them to offer a measuring stick about where they kind of stack up. Like, I think there was, not that there was questions with Marinelli, but what can we get from Marinelli, moving forward in big time duels? Well, I don't think he's a guy, he does get pins, he does get bonuses, but against the top tier guys, we're talking about top 8, top 10 guys, we don't see a lot of, separation in his matches. We see him win a lot. And that's kind of what we saw here with Ethan Smith. Ethan was able to keep it close. I think he got 2 takedowns in the match, was able to keep it within striking distance, keep it respectable. But, at no point was Marinelli ever in danger of this match. So starting off there, I mean, just looking through their guys, like, looking at Kemmerer, yeah, he dominated Romero, but did he, create a lot of separation? No. Same thing with Assad. He wins. He holds form, but what are we getting out of all these guys? And I think that's probably where the discussion is going to turn here in the next month and a half of like, okay, it looks like overall Iowa's got the best team. But how many bonus points can they actually count on, when you're talking about the Big Ten, the NCAA tournament? And realistically, I'm probably saying outside of 25 and 33, I don't know how many bonus points that we can count on with the rest of their lineup. I think that, not saying that they won't get them. I think they will in the first couple rounds of the NCAA tournament. But, Friday through Saturday, how many bonus points will this team be able to secure in, really the championship days of the tournament?
Well, I think depending on where Cassiope hits the top guns, he's obviously going to be one of those top 3 seeds, I think, at this point. So, first, if he gets a pigtail match, or if he ends up getting upset and comes to the backside and hits some of the lower half of the Big Ten, I think he's got the propensity to pick up those falls because he wants to pin people, and that's refreshing. I would have liked to have seen him close that match out with Gary Traub a little bit better and get that he was going for the major, and then Gas Tank Gary's lived up to his billing. Guy never quits, even though if he's getting the doors blown off of him in a match, he never quits. And, he made that 9-3 instead of, Cassiope going there, and he needs to finish that match a little bit better, I think. And I think that's something the coaching staff's going to talk to him. But Tony's a guy that's good. He's really said he wants to go for after that pin record. So he's a guy I think you can definitely count on some bonus points. Again, it's hard to beat those studs that handily. I mean, we're not looking at a situation where you've got one guy head and shoulders just pinning everybody. So it's those 3. I think, DeSanto, Lee, and Cassiope are your bonus guys. Early round matches, I think Marinelli's going to get them. But again, I don't think you're going to see bonus in the finals and the semifinals from even your hammers. It's just logically, it's hard to beat good guys that bad. Although, as we'll talk about later, Kennedy Monday definitely did that to Dave McFadden. So,
oh wow,
yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit too. But as far as the answer, I'd see those 3 or 3.5 are your consistent bonus point guys. Whereas when you're getting out of the top 15, expect Kemmerer to score bonus points. Expect Caleb Young to score bonus points when you get beyond that upper tier.
Yeah, and I think that's where I don't think we take for granted what some of those guys from Penn State have been able to do in the last number of years. But those guys are the outliers, the guys that can bonus all the way through the tournament. And it's almost like we've been conditioned to that because we've seen these guys from Penn State over the last 6 to 8 years just rack up bonus points, first round to finals round. And that doesn't happen that much. I mean, that's just, I guess we were blessed to have that type of talent, and that I guess you appreciate that talent when you see it because it just doesn't happen that often. So yeah, I mean, other takeaways in the match. I think for Ohio State, looking at 184, I think my takeaways looking at Ohio State, I think we know what we're going to get at 141 and 197. I think those guys, the way they're wrestling, pretty good likelihood they're going to make it to the finals or should be right in the hunt. Things happen at the NCAA tournament in the semifinal matches, but, big bonus point, big point scores from Ohio State. You're looking at 41-97. We kind of knew that. So where are they going to generate their other points if they're going to be in a position to win a team trophy? Because I think at this point, you can probably eliminate them from title contention. But I think there's a number of teams anywhere from 3 to 8 that could probably be in position to win a trophy. So where does Ohio State generate those points? And when I look at their lineup, I look at 65 through 84. I think if they're going to get a trophy, I think these are the ways that have to come through for them. And they've shown signs. I mean, I thought Romero had a really good weekend, especially last night, up there in Minnesota, pulling out the victory. I think he was in the mix against Kemmerer, but it doesn't look, from the outcome and the way that match progressed, I don't think, Romero is really going to be a threat to a Kemmerer or the top guys in this weight. But can he slip in and, place from 5 to 8? I think he definitely can. I think 65 can say the same thing. At 184, I think we know now, like where Rocky's sitting right now. I think anywhere from 10 to 25,
I think 10 might be a little high right now. I mean,
right.
He's got a 1 point, but again, Owen Webster's a guy that, was a Division III All-American at Augsburg, in his career, but he's also not really, he was a D1 talent coming out of Shakopee. So, I mean, this is a guy that was highly recruited. And, he started off strong last night, hit the double leg, and then right to a cross wrist tilt. And okay, he's up 4-0. I'm like, wow, okay, this is a new Owen Webster. And then, Rocky's chipping away. And, it ended up being 5-4. You get up 4-0. And that's a hard place to come back from against a good guy. So, like I said, Webster's ranked anywhere from 14 to 18, depending on which rankings you look at. So, I don't know if I can put Rocky right now in that in that 14 and above. But again, he's getting used to the weight class, getting used to being the starter, which is, again, we talked about that on previous episodes. It's different when you're the guy and you have to go through all the team things. So that's one thing. I think Rocky's got a pretty high ceiling. I think right now he's not there yet.
Yeah, and I think, if I'm the coaches at Ohio State, you've got to spin this into a positive. It's very easy, especially when you're a high level talent like Rocky Jordan coming out of high school. You've had an injury that you've been battling through, your redshirt year. You're in and out of the lineup at the beginning of this year. Now it seems like you're the firmly established 184. I think what you have to do if you're the coaching staff at Ohio State, turn everything into a positive, because that's really, he's right there in between 10 and 20. What can you do? What are some of the things you can do in the next 6 weeks to get him over that hurdle, to consistently beat the top 10 guys? Because I think it's still there. I don't think you can just place him in between 10 and 20 and say he's a 2-2 guy at the NCAA tournament and that's all we're getting. I really think he's got the potential to jump on the podium. Is that a stretch right now? Probably. It's probably looking like, but not that much of a stretch.
You don't have to beat all 14 guys ahead of you. You have to beat 3 of them, to get on the podium. And one thing we talked about last episode was 184 after Zahid. I mean, it's who knows what's going to come out there. So I think he's definitely got a shot at the podium. As far as a ranking goes, I don't think he can justify anything, but he's a guy that could be seeded anywhere from 14 to, oh wait, they seed all of them now. So, he could be a dangerous 14-3. If you're familiar with the round ball, that 3-14 game is one where people love the upset on the basketball side. And I'm waiting for those stats to come through to see if there's any trends like that on the wrestling side. But, if his progression stays where it is and he's going to be a double-digit seed coming out of the Big Ten, I've always said that is a dangerous draw. Anybody, when you're a double-digit seed or unseeded coming out of the Big Ten or Big 12, again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're several weeks away from even the Big Tens, let alone nationals. But, that's one thing that 184, there's a litany of people who can place it that weight that aren't on our radar right now. I mean, rankings are going 33 deep, and I don't see a whole lot of separation after, there's Zahid, then there's a tier, and then there's, that 6, you're looking at 6, 7, and 8 can be 20 different guys, in my opinion here.
Yes, I mean, with a guy like Rocky, and I think even at 74 and 65, I think it's the confidence that they're approaching the Big Ten and the NCAA tournament with, and how do you get them, and that's a tough thing in the Big Ten conference, because you don't have weeks off. You don't have a stretch where you're like, okay, I know I can get my guy rolling here over the next 3 weeks. I'm going to get 3, 4, 5 really good wins heading into the conference tournament. I'm feeling good about myself. You're going to have to grind these out. I mean, there are going to be matches like this, for all these guys from Ohio State. These are the matches that you've got to condition yourself. And this is the beauty of the Big Ten Conference. It conditions you to wrestle at a high level week after week after week. No matter what the opponent is, you're in for a fight. And if you can maintain your level of confidence through that fight, highs and lows, good and bad, you're going to stay in a pretty good you're going to be in a pretty decent shape to go on a decent run. So I think if you're Ohio State, I don't feel that bad if I'm Tom Ryan after this match. Would I like more? Was there more out there? Yes, but I think that's a positive thing that you can preach to your guys where, on the flip side, if I'm Brands, this gives you, yes, you had separation, you dominated this match, but where there's things that you could take back to your guys, even in the wins, like, hey, there's more ground to gain. There's more things to accomplish this next 6 weeks of the season. Where can we get better? Because going back to 149. Lugo, and I don't want to say...
We're burying the lead here. We finally get to Lugo and Sasso.
Right? Like, when I looked at Lugo's number one seed, and I think there was a number of guys in Iowa's lineup, like, was their ranking legitimate? Was it warranted? And I think when you look at a guy like Lugo, it's almost, I don't want to say he was a number one by default because he earned the number one ranking, but it's almost like this would be a perfect time for you jumping in from your ranking expertise. Like, what do you do with a guy like Lugo? And, he's an All-American. He's number one, but I think this is a weight class where we just don't know what to do with it.
One thing that, I've always tried to keep a logical progression when it comes to rankings. So, for example, if somebody's 2 and 1 loses, well, 2's going to move up to 1. That is a logical thing, and that's something where I think my all sports background, coming from a newspaper and dealing with AP polls and things like that, impacted how I ranked him when I was at Intermat or how I was with Amateur Wrestling News. Excuse me. But when we look at 149, when we're talking about this and you're looking at the weight class, you're like, well, is there a clear-cut favorite? Absolutely not. This is going to be, they're talking about depth of other weight classes. Well, we're sitting there going, okay, Bulu Allen is that the resume? Is he going to be number one by, like you were saying, maybe by default? Well, does he have the best resume right now? No, but he hasn't lost and he's there. So logically you move up, and sometimes there's soft number ones on resumes. That doesn't mean I'm saying they're soft as a wrestler, but it creates situations where you're looking at this weight class. Jarrett Dagan hasn't wrestled in quite a while now, and then you keep going down, and Keyshawn Clark from American's a guy that's we're looking through resumes. It's like, wow, okay. Brock Mahler, and you're like, yeah, I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at Flo's rankings last week, and I'm like, okay, after what happened this week, what would I do? And I think there's 4 or 5 different ways to do it. But and that's the one thing about rankings, and I've joked about this for years, and having everybody when they do their rankings, they puff their chest out and believe that their rankings are the best. Now, I'd always equate it like this: rankings are like being the skinniest kid at fat camp. Yeah, that's great, but still, okay. It's a perspective. You can put the most work into them, but the worst part about rankings is people are going to look at the rankings that they like the best based on where their guys are situated. You could actually be the most complete in rankings, and people are going to go somewhere else. So ultimately, I don't think there is a right answer in how to sit the rankings, because especially at this weight class, I can see a couple different scenarios unfolding. Right now, I think the one that's probably going to win out across the board is probably Llewellyn moving to 1, just because he hasn't lost, and he moves up. The guys ahead of him have lost. Do I have an objection to Sammy Sasso being ranked number 1? No, not at all. Do I have objection to Austin O'Connor moving back up to number 1? He was 2 in Flo's rankings, where logical progression, 2 moves up. Well, he's got a loss. There's a guy behind him that doesn't. Can Llewellyn jump over O'Connor with not really a significant win? I mean, Thompson's a decent win, so that's the best win recently. So that's where I see 49. I guess the answer to your question is I have no answer to your question. There's so many different ways to go with it.
Yeah, and I could see a scenario, and we'll probably find out tomorrow morning, where
Tuesdays are great for that, right?
We'll probably see 3 different scenarios. We'll probably see 3. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw 3 different number ones at 149, and I wouldn't have a problem with it. I could say
it's an SID's dream there, Matt, because when you get to put with we've got probably one ranking for every 5 teams at this point. So you'd be like, Pat Lugo 1/2/2/1/3/5/12/not ranked. Yeah, that's that's what your score line's looking like. But I digress.
Yes. So any other takeaways before we move on to Penn State, Nebraska?
Well, I feel like that the Iowa-Ohio State and the Ohio State-Minnesota duel are kind of conjoined here with this conversation, because Sammy Sasso is the guy that ties them together. And talking to Sammy after the match, I asked him, about that criticism about not taking any shots. And he says he gave credit to Pat Lugo. He goes, dude, his head-hands defense was so good that when he tried to shoot, he felt the go-behind coming. He goes, I was trying to shoot, but I could not get past his head-hands defense. And he realized it was that good that he's like, ugh. So then I asked Sammy about Brayton Lee in on his legs probably 15, 16 times during that duel. And he goes, I'm comfortable there. He also admits that he's got to not be allowing people to get on his legs that much. But as you saw, Brayton Lee was in constantly. And that may have worn him down. It's like the joke what was it when with Gilman and Lezak gassing him out from bottom. Well, Brayton Lee expelled a lot of energy trying to get in deep and finish. And Sammy Sasso is comfortable there. And that's what he said. He goes, yeah, I need to be there less, but I have no problems there. Luke Pletcher said that he's in on those positions all the time with Sammy, and that's where he's good. He's comfortable. And I believe Tom Ryan even said, how many guys are comfortable walking straight into somebody and being able to attack and all right, you're on my legs, no big deal. And they're confident there. So Sammy's less, offense or less perceived offense. He sees it as, he's a counter wrestler. We know that, but he's also, like I said, he's one of those guys that he's comfortable when you get there. So he did credit Lugo for his head hands defense as a real problem and why it didn't look like he was penetrating with anything.
And it should be interesting, when we look at Sasso and Brayton Lee, they've got a history, right? So going into that match, Sasso knew, okay, I'm very comfortable with this guy. I know the positions I want to get him in. Even if he's in on my leg, I'm very comfortable there. He doesn't really have a history with Lugo. So that, to me, that gives me an indication of what his mat IQ, his wrestling IQ is, understanding like, okay, I'm uncomfortable here. Most guys, even when they're uncomfortable and they're freshmen, they're still going to they're still going to shoot off some shots that they know that they shouldn't shoot. It's just a condition of so many wrestlers. Like, that's what we've been trained to do. You get in an uncomfortable situation, it's the fight or flight syndrome, right? You get in an uncomfortable situation, most wrestlers, if you're young, you're just going to shoot. That shows me a lot of maturity from Sammy Sasso. Like, hey, I know that Lugo has one of the best go downs in the business. So I'm not going to put myself in a situation where I don't know how I'm going to recover because I've never faced this guy before. With Brayton Lee, he's like, okay, get on my leg. You've been in on it like 127 times at this point. I know how to wrestle against this specific opponent in this specific situation. He didn't have the body of knowledge with Lugo. He just doesn't have a lot of opportunities to see him yet. So I give him credit for showing the maturity. Okay, I'm not sure what the outcome of this situation is going to look like if I fire off a shot. So I'm going to sit on it. I'm going to wait for my opportunity, and then I'm going to capitalize. It'll be interesting, JB, moving forward, what we see, the tweaks we see from Lugo and Sasso. Because I think what we're seeing from Brayton Lee, this is kind of a similar match we've seen in freestyle and folk style. Different times. Again,
they know each other. I think even Willie joked that they're like 118 and 117 against one another. I mean, it's a little bit of hyperbole there, but again, I think you make a really good point with its familiarity. I mean, I think Lugo is much more dangerous come the end of the season because he is a senior, because he has been to the show 3 times already. He's been on the podium. He knows what it's like to compete there and at the Big Ten. So the adjustments I think that are really going to be big for the freshmen, speaking about Brayton Lee as well, is how are they going to react going into their first Big Ten tournament? How are they going to react going into their first national tournament? Brayton Lee is going to be wrestling where he goes to college, a little bit of added pressure, those intangibles that I like to talk about. So, and I'll even bring it up. I'll give Richard Immel a shout here. We had a discussion last night. Brayton Lee and Sammy Sasso, over/under of them meeting for an NCAA championship in the finals at least twice during their career. Look at the weight class this year. Well, why not? I mean, why not this year? Well, back to the point though, they're both going to be freshmen at the tournament. So I don't know. That's a fun thing to consider after what we saw last night. It was a close match, but man, it was just, it was action. It was exciting. So it's going to be fun to watch those two the rest of the way. And like I said, I'm not going to dismiss Lugo. He's definitely a title contender.
But from a wrestling perspective, like I'm the same way as you. If I could see those two guys wrestle, Lee and Sasso wrestle every week, I'd pay to watch it because it's going to be entertaining. They just go out there and they scrap every single time, which you love. So putting a bow on Ohio State, Iowa, moving into Penn State, Nebraska. This is probably the most competitive match on the weekend. And it was a high match, 2 top 10 teams against each other, number 7 versus number 2. I think I saw the highest attendance ever at a Nebraska dual meet. So we talked about that. Again, we're seeing records being broken week in, week out. It's awesome for the sport. It was good to see. We saw a similar environment. That was a similar environment that we saw in Final X the last 2 years.
Well, that's a great place. That is an absolutely, the Devaney Center in Lincoln it hosted Final X 2 years in a row. And they brought out the raised platform. Like you're saying, the environment was the same raised platform, almost 6,000 people. I mean, you definitely know that when you got an opportunity to beat a big team and beat a team like Penn State, that's going to bring people out. And Lincoln's a great place to watch wrestling. I don't know what the weather's like this time of year. I know it's great in June and July, a little warm, but that was a duel that was just, you're looking as like, you're scratching your head. Okay, how's Penn State going to pull this out? Because I remember what was it, where they were out without Nolf a couple years ago against Ohio State. And it was like, okay, yeah, how's Penn State going to win this is what's going through my mind. I'm like, they're going to win it. I just don't know how. And sure enough, in this situation, Mark Hall gets those bonus points that are needed. A freshman, Seth Nevels, comes out and gets a win over a very game Christian Lance. And you've got one of your studs in Nebraska. I think some of that with Chad Redd getting majored by a guy he also knows very well, and Nick Lee. That might have put some wind in Penn State's sails. So I'm looking at this going, okay, Mark Hall, mathematically you're the hero here, because how many guys go out and say, okay, I got an All-American? You were talking about bonus points, those big guys, big guns. Well, you just pinned the number 6 guy in the country, and it gave your team 3 extra quality points, and it turned out being the difference is there's a 2-point spread. So I think Mark Hall showed what he's got. I think he's no surprise how good he is, but I think that was really the difference maker to my eyes. And Chenzo and Isaiah White was what it was. I didn't see that going any differently than the way it went. And again, Nick Lee majoring Chad Redd was kind of surprising, but and then maybe Roman Bravo Young with the most deceptive major decision you'll ever see, because it was a 1-point match and then had a riding time point and a 6-point move at the end, and that goes from a 1-point match to an 8-point match. It's wacky.
And my takeaway was, this is a Penn State team, even though it's completely different this year from its make, from its look, from its complexion. They still know how to win the big matches, to your point. They still, when you have your 2 best guys coming up with bonus points against 2 returning All-Americans, 2 top-ranked guys, that's how you win big matches, is finding a way to do something not expected, but doing the thing that's necessary for your team. And being that, there was one of these things that I always used to talk to my guys about, like, that there's going to be some critical matches in every dual meet, especially like this, when you're so evenly matched and it's a 5-5 split. It's like, who's going to be that step up guy? And, not only did Penn State bring Mark Hall in to be the guy he's been, but to be this guy in moments like this. Now the question remains, he's never been forced, JB, really to be that bonus point machine that we know he's capable of, because from a talent perspective, this guy is as talented as any wrestler in the country, regardless of weight class. But he's never been forced into a position where he's got to be that step-up guy week in and week out for the Nittany Lions, just because the great talent surrounding him with Nolf and Nickel. It gave him, those first several years in the program, he didn't have that pressure to be the guy that leads the pack. If Penn State's going to be that guy or be the team to possibly win an NCAA title, they've got to be able to count on this guy to get bonus points. Even though it's hard, even though that's not necessarily what his style does typically, he is capable of it. Now, can he continue to do this, through the end of March? That's going to be one of the biggest things. I think, same thing can be said for Nick Lee. He's been that guy who's been 5th the last 2 years. So we know he's going to place high. They need him to win. They need him to be in the finals, and they need him scoring bonus points throughout, or as much as they possibly can. So, for me to see, Penn State's 2 of their guys, their 2 leaders stepping up in the way that they did, this is what they need from their guys, because they have no margin of error. With Iowa, we've said it, we've talked about it. They have a little bit more margin of error. Their talent is spread. Their talent is spread pretty evenly throughout their lineup. Penn State's talent, is kind of down to maybe 7 at this point, right? 7 guys that you can count on scoring points at the NCAA tournament. How many points? I think as we work our way through the other parts of their lineup, we can discuss that. But they don't have any margin of error this year, so those guys do have to step up in a bigger way.
And when you're looking at the component of the dual meet perspective, say you've got Aaron Brooks, Shakur Rasheed both get beat, and you get decked along the way, and you still win the dual meet. Finding ways to win. And the one thing that impressed me most about Mark Hall is Mikey Labriola is one of the most stingiest wrestlers in the country, even already as a sophomore. The guy is just difficult to score on. I mean, you don't put up big points against this guy. And, Mark Hall was well on his way to cruising. All right, guess what? And not just big points, he packed him. So, I mean, it's like, that to me was, again, sign of that leadership. With Nolf and Rutherford around you, there's a little bit of, you don't have to get the falls like you were saying. So that's one thing that just probably impressed me most about Mark Hall. His ability to ride, because I believe I saw a comment on Twitter that his ability to ride was underrated. I'm not sure who said it, or else I'd give you credit. But he's one of the toughest riders in the country. And then that ability to just, make a really, really good wrestler look bad. And, what's that going to do? He's got that it factor to him.
He's got that gear, right? There's very few guys that it's like, when we're talking about that gear, that next level, when it's all on the line, it's not usually about winning and losing, because most of those guys win, but it's finding that gear to do something special when it's absolutely necessary. And he's capable of that. And I'm sure that's what the coaches that are at Penn State are pushing him, like, Mark, we know you can win. You've shown that for 3.5 years. We know you can win in every situation. We need you to win more and better, and you have that. So it's not like it's an unrealistic expectation from the Penn State coaches. He's got that in him. I think it's a much different thing to expect a guy like Vincenzo Joseph. Like, he doesn't quite. I mean, I look at Joseph, and that guy's just the ultimate winner. He creates ways to win, but he doesn't necessarily create bonus points. And case in point, his match with Isaiah White. White is one of the best guys out there. He's going to win this match 9 times out of 10 in this exact same scenario: 5-1, 4-2, 6-3. That's kind of the match that Vincenzo Joseph is always going to have against Isaiah White. And that's kind of looking at Nebraska's team. They kind of have, I don't want to, this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment, JB, but I'm like, this is why I don't think they're a top 5 team. They're very, very talented, but they have a lot of guys like Isaiah White, Chad Redd, that have very good moments. Venz, 2 very good moments, and then they turn around like Venz on Sunday and lose a match against Michigan State that he has no business losing. And so when I see consistency from Nebraska's team, I think that's kind of where they're lacking. They're lacking consistency in big level moments to really think that they can be a top 5 team. I think they're firmly in the top 10, but to say that they've got a legitimate shot at the top 5, not that it could happen, because I think it could, but I think it would take a series of good performances for them to be a top 5 team.
Yeah, and looking at how the rankings shake out, this to me, in my estimation, is a better dual team than it is a tournament team. Although you look at the rankings, Coach's Poll has them 7, Flo's tournament ranking points has them 7. So, okay, maybe they're about the same in that regard. But for a tournament format with the nuances that are prevalent within the scoring, which is one of my irks when it comes to how our sport is determined with the championship scoring system, that if you can't do it by hand, and if you can do it by hand, you're over the age of 50, I guarantee it. And you can't do it times 70-something teams. But we're looking at, to get those big points to place in that top 10, that top 5, you need Chad Redd to make the finals. You need Isaiah White to make the finals. Finals points are huge. And then you need guys in that 4-5 if they're going to place, not the 7-8. The 7-8's not going to get you that many extra points, whereas the 4-5 will get you, 6, 7, 8 more points, I think, in terms of how it shakes out. In the finals, of course, you're getting your 12 plus just by making it there, plus the bonus and advancement along the way. So I think usually we're averaging 20-some points when you get in the finals. So right there, that makes the difference. It takes 2 guys making the finals to really give your team a shot at the top 10. And right now, do we have 2 guys on Nebraska's roster that can make the finals? And right now, I don't think so. I think they can have a lot of guys in that 3rd, 4th place match, but I don't see a finalist in their lineup right now.
No, I'm with you.
With the exception of 84 because of how the weight is. Even though we just talked about Taylor Venz losing to Cam Caffey. Again, Zahid and everybody else. It just depends on is he 7 or is he going to be, if he's 8, he's going to hit Zahid early. If he's anywhere from 7, so 7's down there, 10's down there, 11's down there. So, you don't want to necessarily sit in that 8-9 spot if you're Taylor Venz.
No, and that's the interesting thing about Venz. I was pretty surprised by this outcome. Like I know he's very tough, but he kind of, I don't want to say he bullied Brooks, but he kind of physically was the superior opponent in a lot of situations. When it came down to technique versus strength, it seemed like Venz was able to exert his physical will over Brooks' technical skill, which is surprising because Brooks is a very, very powerful guy. I was kind of surprised that Venz was able to overpower him in certain situations. So yeah, again, I think what it's going to come down to a 184, that guy that's going to be in the finals against Zahid. I think, who knows? I think it's going to come down to a bunch of stylistic matchups. I don't really think rankings are going to play a big factor in who makes the finals against Valencia. I don't think seed's going to play a big factor into who makes the finals against Valencia. I really think it's stylistically how these guys match up against each other. And, if I'm Venz, I'm feeling pretty good against Aaron Brooks. But if I'm Aaron Brooks, I'm like, okay, I felt this guy out. I can probably turn some things around. But yeah, 84 for that number 2 slot. And I don't want to put too much pressure on Valencia, but
he can handle it. Come on, man. He can handle it. He's fine.
He can. You're right. So for me, I think going into and looking into next week, I think that the logical takeaways are like, now we're starting to look at Penn State versus Iowa. But before we get to all that, I guess some of the other questions, like what's your takeaway on Seth Nevels? Because I think JB, people forget what a great high school wrestler this guy was. And he hasn't been in the lineup. He was behind the national champ this last year. It's looking like he's behind Kassar again this year, and now he's in the lineup. He's having some good results. He beat the number 15 guy. I think people are looking past, and they're already forgetting how dominant of a high school wrestler Seth Nevels actually was.
And we're talking a weight class that is notoriously difficult to recruit. I mean, what are the 2 toughest weights to recruit? 125, because you're looking for that career 125, and you're looking for an athletic heavyweight that's not a stud football player. So with Nevels, with a family of wrestlers, and he's had those room battles in his living room his entire life, but also not just a good high school wrestler, but where he comes from at Clovis, the coaching that he's had his entire life, prepared him for this next level. So I was not a bit at all surprised that he beat Christian Lance, who's had a pretty good season so far. Again, kind of an unknown coming from Fort Hays State in Division II prior to coming into Nebraska. But the fact that he's technically sound, he's not going to make a whole lot of mistakes. I think he's a little bit more than your average redshirt freshman or freshman, whichever year. I can't remember off the top of my head if he deferred a year or if he's in there as a traditional redshirt. But this is a guy that's not going to make that many mistakes, even though he is young. He's a guy that's not a liability out there, and he's talented enough to beat pretty much everybody outside of the top 10, I'd say, consistently. Now the question is where, we're waiting to see where the litmus test is how's he going to do against, I'm keeping Stevenson out of this equation right now, because I want to see him against Cassiope. I want to see him, especially this weekend. I want to see what he does against guys like Trent Hilger. So against that tier, that's okay, going to challenge for the finals. So this week, especially against Cassiope, is going to be a real test on where he's at. Is it going to be a 3-2 Cassiope sneaks one out, or is it going to be the other way around? I think he's definitely an underdog against Cassiope. But again, great coaching growing up, supremely talented, hates to lose, but also loves to win. There's a difference between hating to lose and loving to win. They're completely different mindsets. So, I like I said, I see nothing about Seth Nevels that makes me think he's not an All-American contender right now. And even though he was behind Anthony Kassar, how many of the room battles this guy's also had with the guys he's scrapped with, not just his brothers growing up. So I'm pretty high on Seth Nevels. I can't really put my finger on the actual technical reasons why, but it's one of those guys you look at and wrestles well and wins positions that, okay, it comes down to it. He's going to win that position. He's going to make sure that he's going to defend a bad shot and half shot and make you pay for it. And that's what we saw against Christian Lance because, it got down to the desperation move and he's won the position battle and he ultimately won the match in a very tactical manner, in my opinion.
And from a body type, he's a bigger version than his brother. So he's, from a size perspective,
he's every bit as athletic too. I mean, don't heavyweights don't often pass the eye test. I mean, granted, when you see a guy like Brock Lesnar walk out there, you're like, okay. But when you see guys that are just okay, Dustin Fox was a giant. Tommy Rollins was more lanky. He was big, but he had the length to him. So you're seeing different types of heavyweights do different type of things. And I think Seth is kind of like, you can probably box him in like the prototypical heavyweight that you want to get because he can do the inside tie stuff and control the center and win a slow down match, or he can get after it and take some attacks and wrestle a guy who likes to move, a little more of a mobile heavyweight. So I think he's kind of the balance between what you want in a heavyweight. Just now it's his progression, how much he gets better to jump levels and be a championship contender or top 3 contender at heavyweight this early in his career.
Yeah, and we'll get to see that next week. And I know tomorrow or on the next podcast, we're going to be really heavy into the breakdown of the Iowa Penn State dual meet this weekend. Transitioning from here, I think the jaw dropper of the weekend, and I was getting text messages from guys. I saw everything on social media, and that was Friday night in the ACC, Kennedy Monday, Tech falling, David McFadden. Nobody saw that coming. I mean, I had so many texts and people on social media. I'm like, what is this real? Did they mix up the box score? Was this a typo? What was this? No, this was a Tech fall from Kennedy Monday over the number 3 ranked wrestler in the country, David McFadden.
Yeah, I went to try to look this up because it was one of those things where it was on the ACC network and let's be honest, I'm a cord cutter, so my sister's cable company did not actually have that on their cable system for some reason. It was on ESPN, so I haven't had a chance to go watch the match, but I did, expecting this to come up. I asked Tony Roby this morning and said, what was your opinion on it? And he just said something wasn't right with Dave. He said he felt really bad, but he's confident that he'll be able to make adjustments and bring him back moving forward. But he also said it was a real head scratcher, whereas Coleman Scott's perspective on it was, he said it was a butt whipping, and the keys there was Kennedy got to his offense and was patient. And maybe based on what I've read about the matches, McFadden got caught in a couple rolls trying to get cute perhaps, or trying to get out, and then got caught in position. So again, this is based on reading it. I didn't actually watch the match, but again, the perspectives of both coaches is kind of telling because clearly Tony Roby knows something wasn't right with David McFadden, but clearly Coleman Scott is pleased with how Kennedy Monday got to his offense and created those positions to maybe get David McFadden flustered. So it's not like you can just chalk this completely up to David McFadden having an off day. Well, guess what? 2 guys come to wrestle, they put the foot on the line, off day or not, a win's a win, and this is a match that I think is really going to screw up the seeding at the NCAA championships at this weight class, because you know how the seeding situation works sometimes is you look at that one match. Let's look at Sean Boyle a couple of years ago when he beat Gilman when he was wrestling at Chattanooga. That win carried him to I think a 5 seed at the time, whereas the resume probably had him an 8 or 9. Well, in this case, Kennedy Monday's had some interesting matches this year, but this win over McFadden's going to carry him, even though they're going to probably meet in the ACC tournament. This win is notable for his seed. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm wondering what the after effects of this are going to be for the rest of the country, because that does impact where the seeds go come nationals. Again, even though they're going to come through the ACC, and say McFadden beats him next time out, there's a split there. There would be a 1-1 split, and then how do you factor that all in? So credit to Kennedy Monday being prepared, going into a hostile environment, because I've done a podcast with Virginia Tech now for 6 years. And it goes back to my relationship with Kevin Dresser, and Hokie Nation has embraced this sport. For those that don't know, Iowa's got message boards. Penn State has message boards. Oklahoma State has message boards. When Virginia Tech had hired Kevin Dresser, they had the Olympic sports board. They had football, basketball, and then everything else, their non-revenue sports, the Olympic sports, were on one message board. Now they have their own wrestling board. Hokie Nation embraces this team, and they were ready for Carolina. They were number 3 in the country without Mekhi Lewis. They're sitting there, going to have a big crowd. Coleman Scott's got Carolina coached up big time. Tony Roby and I talked about this last week on Inside Virginia Tech Wrestling, that there were 6 toss-up matches in this bout. That wasn't a toss-up, in my opinion. That was one bout that I wasn't really circling. Okay, that's McFadden 7-3 or something like that. And then all of those things went Carolina's way. Carolina's trying to reach out to see right now, is this the highest win they've ever had in school history? I'm going to dig some research on that later. But the fact that Virginia Tech has this hostile environment and Carolina came in and just worked them is telling for the progress that Carolina's made, the progress that Coleman Scott has made down in Chapel Hill. I mean, we know how good Dresser did set the table, and then how Roby has just continued that rolling for Virginia Tech. But this is the coming out party for Carolina, who still has that head scratching dual loss to Stanford earlier this year. But credit to Carolina having those guys prepared. And Kennedy Monday again got to his positions and was patient, according to Coleman Scott.
Yeah, without a doubt. Now, going back and put my coach's hat on, this is exactly what I would expect to hear from both coaches, right? If I'm Tony Roby, sometimes you just have to chalk some things up. Sometimes, and I didn't.
When was the last time you remember a 3-time All-American getting tacked?
I can't.
That's one of those stats.
Again, if I'm a coach of a 3-time All-American, he goes out and gets tech fouled, I'm like, hey, throw this one out. Short memory. Sometimes you have to do that. I wouldn't do that often, but 17 this was as bad as it could possibly get. So, if I'm Tony Roby, I'm like, hey, David, he's mature. He's a fifth-year senior. He's been through this highs and lows. He's experienced it all. And I think he's mature enough like, okay, this is an outlier. Obviously, I gotta look into this and kind of figure out what went on. But this wasn't consistent with what we've seen in the last 4 years from this guy. So I think every once in a while, you don't want to do it often, but I think in this situation if I'm Tony at this point in the season, like outlier, complete outlier, David, let's reboot, let's reset and get going. If I'm Coleman Scott, this is probably exactly the same things he's been preaching to Kennedy Monday for the last several years, like consistency, being patient with your attacks, converting things, being mature in the moment. I think this was probably a takeaway that Coleman Scott has been looking for Kennedy to have. He's like, look, Kennedy, you could do this every single week. You could do this to top-ranked guys consistently. Let's bottle this up. Let's package this up. Let's move it forward in the next week and see if we can continue to replicate certain of these things. But yeah, I'm hearing coaching speak from both of these guys, and the coaching speak that you probably need to give to your guys in these moments. So, but again, exciting. A huge ACC duel. I think it's exciting that we're seeing thousands of people starting to pack the ACC duels. But yeah, outside of that, Jason, we're running up over 45 minutes that we've done consistently. So I know there was other things we need to get to. I know we're going to jump into Penn State, Iowa heavy tomorrow. I know we want to touch on the emerging status of women's wrestling. I don't know if you want to, preview that or tease that a little bit, but
just
very
so
important
I can get
weekend for women's wrestling.
Absolutely. The Division II and Division III approved women's wrestling as an emerging sport, and Division I will vote on this in April. And I'm holding off on getting the full, issuing I guess an opinion or a show on it, because I need to know more about how this works. Because the biggest question I have is, of course, right now Division II and Division III are going to move forward with it. I believe it takes play. I guess it starts up. I'm struggling for the words. August is when it, I guess, is fully enacted. But the question I have, and this is the questions I'm going to ask. I've got questions out to the NCAA right now on how does this work. So sand volleyball and bowling, women's bowling, are the two sports that have gone from emerging sports status to championship status, to my knowledge. And I'm curious on how that happens. So right now we're looking at, if you look at Division I men's ice hockey, there is no Division II in men's ice hockey. It's Division I and Division III. Division I is scholarship. That's where your St. Cloud States that are traditional Division II schools are Division I ice hockey teams because they're scholarship. What's this going to mean for women's wrestling? That's what I want to know. Right now we've got just one Division I team with a Division I school. I got to make that clear because Lock Haven is a Division I wrestling school, but is a Division II institution. So that makes a difference right now. So whereas Lock Haven is voting for this, where they're not a Division I member for all sports except for field hockey and wrestling are their only D1 sports. So I'm curious on the format. What happens? is that, okay, where do we go championship-wise? This year, there is a Women's Collegiate Wrestling Coalition Championship at Adrian College for the NCAA member schools, which are in the 40s right now. The emerging sports status, they've got 10 years. Here's what I do know. They got 10 years for Division II and Division III to reach 40 schools so they can be championship status, so they can be a championship status. In the meantime, what I understand is when they get there, they'll have an NCAA championship. It won't be considered Division I. It'll just be NCAA. Commonly, we see championships before 1973. We call that D1. Well, it was technically the NCAA University Division. So again, it's semantics, to be honest with you, but it is important in the distinction of what is it D1? No, it's NCAA wrestling. We won't see divisional breakouts for a number of years, and that's what I need to get answered before I can come back with you and give you any finality on what the process is. So those are the questions I'm going to ask. But in the meantime, this was a huge stepping stone for women's wrestling. I think it's probably 10 years overdue, at least 10 years overdue. I was joking with Sally Roberts saying this was 25 years in the making, whereas, you know, and one thing to remember about women's wrestling, we see the dual meets right now. We are seeing over 20 states with high school wrestling. We are 10 years away from this really, you're seeing what's going to happen now really be impactful 10 years ago. And that's not just with what Wrestle Like a Girl, the NWCA, the Women's Sports Foundation, the Hall of Fame, USA Wrestling, all of those groups that are involved in making this a reality. Now we have to wait for the high schools to develop. So I think we're going to be 2 state tournament generations away from the high school to get enough athletes to fill all these rosters. We cannot apply the same 100 years of men's sports that we've had to a sport like women's wrestling because we've got generations. Like I joke that nobody's grandmother wrestled. Okay, think about that for a second. Jake Pataxel was an All-American at Purdue. His grandfather was a national champion in the 50s. Women's wrestling does not have that, and we don't have that generational buildup where people have been going to the nationals for 20 and 30 years to watch their daughters wrestle, their nieces, and things like that. So women's wrestling, we have to be patient. Administrators have to be patient to know that this is a new sport for the NCAA. It will be a new sport. How that develops, and you can't just look at the roster, well, there's 4 forfeits. Well, you need that base of athletes. That's with the high school. It's a chicken and egg sometimes. But now that we're seeing over 20, and I think we're going to have 25 states, probably my guess by the end of this year, that have sanctioned women's wrestling. Still waiting on you, Iowa. Still waiting on you, Pennsylvania. Iowa had a great turnout for their non-sanctioned girls state tournament this weekend. But that is what it's going to take, 5 years from now when this next group of athletes have gone through state tournaments for 4 years. Now they're college ready. Then the next group. So we're going to have rosters filled. So the best thing about emerging sports status that I know is you've got 10 years to develop it. 10 years. And that is a good thing because 10 years from now, women's wrestling in this country on the collegiate level is going to look drastically different than what we've got right now. And we've got 74 schools across the NAIA, the NCAA, junior colleges, even some club programs popping up that are embracing the sport. So, people want to quickly point that this can save men's wrestling from a Title IX situation. No, we're not creating this sport to save another. We're creating this sport because the girls deserve the chance to wrestle on the mat just like the boys do. They deserve the opportunity to learn from the sport of wrestling just like we did. Everything we talk about, and I'm echoing Terry Steiner's statements right now. Why give the gift of wrestling to just half the population? 10 years from now, we are going to see an explosion of women's wrestling finally take hold. It's starting, it's going, it's only going to get bigger. And then as a result, yes, the byproduct of that, not the reason, but the byproduct is going to be, we're going to see more schools adding men's and women's wrestling, and we're going to add more men's programs. So yes, this has a positive for the men's programs as a byproduct. Don't look at that as the reason. It is, basically it's not, I don't want to say collateral damage, but it's what's going to happen as a result is we're going to get more men's programs as a result of this being a real thing. But that shouldn't be the first reason. That's in the rear view.
Yep. Well said, JB. And I look forward to.
I'm out of breath on that one, Matt.
I know you got to talk. You're going to be talking to Sally coming up. Would like to dig more into this on upcoming episodes, but until then, appreciate the conversation today, JB. This is a lot of fun. Look forward to breaking down the match everybody's wanting to see, Penn State, Iowa, and look forward to talking to you tomorrow.